Thanks for joining us today on By Subject, the Silicon Slopes Brand and Marketing Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Stevenson, and in this episode, my co-host, Eric Dahl, and I had a chance to sit down with John Huntinghouse, the VP of Marketing at TAB Bank. John, so maybe tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, where you're from, what got you into marketing.
Yeah, that's a whole podcast in and of itself, but yeah, I grew up in West Valley City and born and raised here in Utah, and as we were talking about, we went to Granger High School, and the goal was, my mom's Korean, and she, just like most Korean parents, want their kids to be a doctor or a lawyer, and so the goal was to be a doctor. And about a month before I started medical school, I ended up having a conversation with a friend of mine who was in medical school, and he didn't mean it to be a life-changing, it was a throwaway comment, but he was just like, what are the things you study when you don't have to study anything? Mm-hmm. And it wasn't meant to be like this career-altering thing, but then I started thinking about it, and like it was never medicine, ever. I only studied it because I had to for school.
Yeah.
And so then, I went probably a good 4 or 5 years of finally trying to figure out, like, what do I want to do? Now that I've decided not to go the medical school route and become a doctor, like, what do I want to do? And dabbled in a lot of different things, and then ended up backdooring my way into marketing. And actually, I got into marketing through blogging and social media. So
dating yourself there.
I know, right? Like, it's just.
So when you say back, kind of backing into it, where was that at? What were you doing that for a company? Were you doing it for yourself? How did you back your way into that?
Yeah, it was just a hobby. We created a little media company. It was just sharing fun. Like, at the time, this was before me. Again, I'm dating myself. But this was before memes were really a thing. And we were creating very culturally relevant and humorous memes and videos and content. And we just did it because it was funny, and we thought it would be fun to create. It started off as a Facebook page, just like a little group, because we didn't know what else to do, and we were just throwing it out there. And then it started to pick up steam, and we had some posts go viral, and then we started to lean into it a little bit more. And then I ended up doing it full time. So what was that jump from, like, this is a hobby / something fun that I can do, to being full time? And where was that at, and what was that role that you took on? Yeah, so we had a lot of traction, and as I was doing this just on the side. And we probably had, both from our website, we had generated over, 250,000 fans on Facebook, and our website was getting around, 1.2 million views a month. And so we were getting a lot of traction, but it wasn't until we started to look into it, it's like, okay, so how do we change this from a hobby and make it into something that we could do full time? And, one of the things was just like, when you're only doing things for yourself or things that you find interesting, that really is the definition of a hobby. Sure. But a career focuses on other people. And so then we're like, how can we take this vehicle and make it, help other people and dive into that. And as we started to do that and like start to listen to our customer and not just put content just for the sake of content, but really trying to find a value add. We also that's how we ended up making money off of this, to a point that we could go full time. But then it really got me into and helped me really understand and learn the value of listening to your customers, because, though they're interacting with you and engaging with you, until you actually ask them and talk to them and, interact with them one-on-one, that's when they really start to open up and just like, hey, I love the stuff you are doing, but like, this is really my pain point, or these are the things I would really love to see from you, all of you. And that's when we kind of made that shift and kind of took off from there. So when you say you went full time, you were starting out as your own media company. Yeah. Was when you went full time, and you did this with some friends, or just me and my wife? Just you and your wife? Yeah, It was just the two of us.
Who's more creative, you or your wife?
Oh, easily my wife. Yeah. Like, you should see the first iteration of the website. It was awful, and it was we were sharing funny, humorous, light content. and the website literally was all black, and there was Chrome everywhere. Like we thought Chrome would be awesome because it was cool, and I thought it was going to be cool, and so I created it and I showed it to my wife, and she's like, "What is this? Like, we can't run with this." And I was like, "It's awesome," and she's like, "Okay," and so we kind of threw it out there, and like immediately everyone's like, "I feel like I'm in a spammy website, or I'm at a website that I'm not supposed to be, and
I want to get onto the Wayback Machine and check out this website now.
Dude, I still have screenshots of the original logos and like the above the fold on their website. So I'll have to share that with you.
Yeah, we're gonna use that for promotion for this podcast.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. It was awful. So definitely my wife is the more creative of the two of us. But yeah. It was fun. It was fun being able to work with her and do something together. And that was our first time really being able to interact and work together in a professional standpoint. And yeah, that's kind of where it got started.
So tell me this, in working with your wife, what did you learn about marketing? And, you tell me that she's an artist. She understands, she has a good eye for things. But what characteristics do you feel like that you picked up from her along the way in working with her?
Well, the one thing is learning how to listen, because, this was, as we were working together, it was just, we were constantly, like both of us, we were both doing this. Like I had a vision of what I wanted to do and I would run it, and like she hated the idea, but she had her own vision, and she would want to run it one way. And in the early days when we were first starting to create this content, like we didn't really actually understand how to work very well together in a professional sense. And so we would just give up. So like I would say like, this is what we should do. And she's like, fine, whatever, just do it your way. Or vice versa. She's like, this is what I want to do. And I was like, fine, I don't want to argue. We'll just run with it. And it actually it rarely worked. And what worked best was like neither of our ideas were actually solid initially, right? It was actually taking that initial concept and being patient with it in terms of developing and refining the content and digging a little bit deeper. And then as we're getting feedback from each other and from other people, just being patient with it. And then all of a sudden we had created really awesome content. And then it was a much better product. And it's something that I've just learned, even being more in the kind of the corporate space now, learning that never go out with a first draft. Like it's like my biggest pet peeves. And I feel like I understand the idea of you don't want analysis paralysis, right? Like you do want to ship things out. But I think sometimes it gets blown on the other end where it's just ship whatever out, right? And it's like there is a little bit of quality control, and your best ideas are 4, 5, 6 layers deep. And then once you kind of work through that a little bit, then all of a sudden your best ideas do come out. And that was something that was really, that we both learned through that process.
I love that because it is looking at it with a fresh set of eyes, but also understanding that it's an evolution.
Yep.
That's powerful. So I completely agree with you. And John, I've followed you on LinkedIn for many years, and I love the content that you put out on LinkedIn. You have great posts, but tell me kind of about your approach to putting out just organic LinkedIn content and like what you do to move the needle, because I feel like you do a fantastic job, but I would like to understand kind of your method behind it.
Yeah, it really is. Most of the time, it really is just me looking at things or observing something and really interjecting my own voice where I feel like I have something to add. I feel like I have something to add all the time, right? And I think a lot of us, we all have opinions, like if I take a marketing idea and ask any of my family members, like every single one will have an opinion, right or wrong. But if really looking at ideas and topics or just things that I'm observing that I feel like I have a unique perspective, or just something different than what's generally being talked about, those are kind of the ideas that I like to dive into when it comes to LinkedIn specifically, just because I kind of treat it almost like ads, right? Where it's just like, if I'm just going to post another post about Elon Musk that everyone else is posting about the exact same thing, like I'm not really contributing to that conversation, but like, how do I add my unique voice to a conversation, to a topic? And I just kind of found a little niche in that. But I think learning to like, I just think it's a general, principle, whether you're doing on LinkedIn or you're sharing in front of a corporate boardroom or interacting with your boss or team, learning to find your voice and, champion your voice, I think is a really big deal. And that was something I learned in the agency world when I worked at Epic Marketing, was learning to champion my own ideas, because I used to just throw out an idea. It would get bombarded with, like, everyone hated the idea. And then I would just sit back down. I'm like, sorry, like, I didn't mean to throw out such a crappy idea. But I had an awesome creative director at the agency. It's like, listen, if you don't, like, interject your voice out there or put your ideas out into the world, it'll never get out there. And, like, your impact just doesn't exist, right? It's everyone else's opinion, everyone else's thoughts. And so learning to just, like, it's okay, like, if people disagree with you, but if you feel like you have a unique voice or perspective, to add that to it.
Yeah. And I love that, because everybody has their own unique takes, but the consistency with that unique take, that's what's going to, drive the results.
Yeah.
I'm anxious to get in and to talk more about your experience at the bank, and we'll get to that. I know you were at KSL for a while. So tell me a little bit about the experience at KSL.
Yeah, it was definitely had a love-hate relationship with my time at KSL. When I first landed that job, it really was kind of a dream job. I just thought it was awesome, and there were so many experiences that I had there that I loved. And it was just, you got to do really cool things and be at really cool events and talk to really interesting people. But, I think from a culture standpoint, like, my personality just doesn't fit very well in a newsroom personality, in a newsroom culture. And vice versa, like, having been there for a while, like, KSL's culture, like, just doesn't fit very well with my personality. But I did, it's funny, because I have a friend, Eric, and he was telling me about, like, sometimes, like, even your bad experiences you have in the corporate world, whether it's bad coworkers or managers or culture, whatever, oftentimes that's where you learn the most. And from a leadership standpoint, it's definitely where I learned to make that jump from an individual contributor to like a manager or a director or a leader, because I learned a lot of the lessons the hard way. I was really good at creating content. That's what we had done, and that's what got me to where I was. But learning to help the team grow and learning how to enable them and empower them to do well, that was a hard lesson that I had to learn the hard way. But yeah, definitely had like a love-hate relationship when I was there.
What was your role when you were there?
I was their social media director.
Okay.
I was the executive producer of their social content.
Oh,
yeah,
scary.
Yeah, and it's funny because there's a lot of hate on the media, and I understand where some of that hate or like that distrust comes from, and partly is culturally. The newsroom is constantly just trying to put out, you're kind of constantly trying to feed this beast. But on hindsight, like having worked in there, people really are trying to do the best they can, right? They're, almost, I have never seen, like people talk about like this agenda or trying to drive certain things, but I never saw that, right? Like a lot of the mistakes or things that were made were legitimate mistakes, and I made them myself, and I think the people there are trying to do good work. But yeah, it's like you learn because of the nature of that environment and that industry, like mistakes happen and sometimes, yeah, you have issues that kind of pop up.
So from KSL, you ended up, is that when you made the jump to Epic?
Yeah, I did.
And what was it that drove you to go, going from, in-house at KSL now to an agency again? What was it that drove you to think about going from in-house to agency?
Well, it was kind of fortuitous, if you will. When it was literally my last day at KSL, I was on my way to drop off my computers and everything, and then I got a phone call from my friend Sean, who was their director of digital marketing, and he's like, "Hey, John, I know you're at KSL, and probably loving it and having a great time. But would you be open to working at Epic? And I'm like, well, funny that you should ask. Like, today's my last day. And so it was really interesting because I always wanted to be in that agency space, like in a full service agency with a lot of these awesome and amazing clients. And so that definitely intrigued me. And then as I had that conversation and that interview with them and getting to know a little bit more about the agency itself, I was sold and bought in, and just jumped on that opportunity to, work with an amazing agency that had amazing clients on board.
So what was the difference from your perspective of working in-house at KSL versus agency world? What was your day-to-day like? What did you like about each of those places? What did you dislike about being at an agency versus in-house?
Yeah, no, the agency world, it's a constant fire, right? Like, so like the hardest part of dealing with an agency is just like you're working with so many different clients, and there's always like some kind of big issue or some kind of fire you're trying to put out. But at the same time, I think that's what was so rewarding about the agency life. And, I teach a lot of college students, and, I really do recommend for most college students to, if they can find a way to get into an agency, to do that, because I just think it provides you with so many opportunities to learn, grow, hone your skills. And, when you're working with anywhere from 5 to 20 different clients, you just see a lot of different marketing. You see a lot of different leaderships. You're dealt with a lot of different personalities. And you get to test out a lot of different things. And so for me, the variety that an agency brought was awesome. And it really was where I refined and honed in my own, I started off in social media and kind of developed my, digital marketing and paid social, which is kind of my wheelhouse. But at the agency is really where I fine-tuned that in and really honed in those skills. And being able to test it out. It's like, okay, I have these ideas and I've done it, in a narrow way at a brand and, previous to that. But like to be able to do it across like 30 different clients and see, all right, you know what, my thesis on this idea actually doesn't work. It only works in this industry. Or this actually in B2C works really, really well. Let's just, this is something that there's some legs to it. And it was an awesome opportunity to really dive into it and really hone in the skills that I had, developed up to that point.
I think what you said about agency life is spot on. I heard a TED Talk once where the speaker was talking about multitasking and how if you're dealing with different initiatives, and so it's very easy to plug into agency life, but if you're juggling multiple things at once, it's a creative boost. And the example that he gave was Albert Einstein wrote these scientific papers, and he wrote multiple papers inside of 1 year. And it was probably the most successful year of his career because he was juggling multiple things. And so his creative juices were always firing, right? And as a marketer, that's a lot of fun. But transitioning that from agency life, and then did you go straight to the bank from Epic?
I did.
So tell me kind of the dynamic from going from an agency life back into in-house to now a bank setting.
Yeah.
What was that like?
It was different for sure. But I mean, one of the reasons I did want to go back in-house was that, you get to work banker hours, right?
Yeah.
And it was a lot.
The banker holidays.
Yeah, the banker holidays.
Yeah.
Like I remember my first, it's actually Monday is a bank holiday coming up. And I remember my first Columbus Day, I showed up and I can't get into the bank. I'm like, what the heck? Like, what's going on? And I messaged my team and they're like, yeah, it's a holiday. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's right. Like we have these things, but it was very different, but it was different in a good way. And for me, I really enjoyed and I loved doing it because the one thing is, agency gives you a lot of variety to do a lot of different things, but being in-house allows you to do depth, like very in-depth. A lot of the things that I wanted to do when I was at an agency just didn't have the time or the bandwidth to be able to dive deeper in some of those things. And then ultimately, one of the things that bugged me is you would have a really awesome idea, right? Or like a different approach in an agency. And then, the VP is like, nah, I don't like that idea. Yeah. Or just, you never get that idea out there. And so then having the opportunity, it's like, you know what? Like, I want to get some of these ideas and test them out, even some of the ones that are a little bit out there, and kind of see how that goes. And
so you chose a bank to put the wild ideas out.
Yes, because well, I mean, to that point, right? Is when you look across most bank marketing. And it's funny because whenever we, work with an agency or a freelancer or whatever, they'll always want comparables. And I'm like, I'll give you comparables, but don't look at the comparables. Like, because most bank marketing is pretty awful. It's not very well done. And so to be able to change or, revitalize an industry that I feel like was stagnant was awesome. I felt like it was an awesome opportunity. Despite, dealing with crazy amounts of regulatory issues. And, I'm so used to like coming up with an idea, producing it and like, an hour later, like just throwing it out there, kind of testing it out. But having to go through that process, you kind of use those, obstacles, if you will, as a way to optimize and be creative in your solutions. It's like, okay, well, these are the constraints we have. How do we now get around them? Because most banks and most places that are in these highly regulated industries just don't. They're just like, well, there's too many obstacles in the way. We'll just play it safe. This is the easy path. But when you take that challenging path, then all of a sudden you're able to do a lot of fun things. And yeah, it was a lot of fun, and it still is a lot of fun. Still trying to navigate those hurdles.
I'd love to hear some of those ideas that you came out of Epic saying, I want to try to push the boundaries or push this. What are some of those specific ideas that you had that you brought to TAB Bank? How did you, that maybe other people could learn from?
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of different things.
Which I only want to hear the ones that worked.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there was a lot that didn't work as well. But I would say probably the one thing that has worked really well for us right now over at TAB, that we just have a brand new consumer product that we just launched about a month ago, and it's learning to leverage like influencer marketing in the right way. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of, again, it's a bank. There's a lot of regulations, a lot of hurdles around that. But it is, oftentimes we look at influencer marketing as a very simple thing. It's like you hire an influencer, you create some kind of message, they share it with their audiences and kind of run with it. But being able to create like a shared community with your influencers, as well as with their community, as well as yours, I think there's a lot of power in that community building. And, that's one of the things that we're building out, right? Like we're one of the first banks to have a Discord channel. Why do we have a Discord channel? People are just like, well, that's stupid. That's a dumb idea. But it is to build around this community and have a two-way conversation. And I just feel like a lot of times when we're trying to work, in banking specifically, we're still stuck in this, 1990s era of like, one-to-many, broadcasting. And when you're dealing with a community, and specifically with influencer marketing, finding the right influencers that will help, that A, believe in your brand, and then B, that will interact with it, right? It's not just, shouting it out or sharing your message out to them. And having been in that space, I've been on both sides of that influencer space, and the brand campaigns that sucked, that were awful, was when the brand's like, hey, this is the script, like you run with this, only do this, these are the guardrails, and then you run with that. But when you work with those influencers and to kind of build out a community and have more of a long-term approach to influencer marketing, I think it becomes wildly more beneficial, and you create massive amounts of brand advocates when it comes to organic brand advocates who are just naturally wanting to talk about your brand.
So when you say influencers and banks, to me that's like oil and water.
Yeah.
And so it's fascinating to explore that. And I love the idea of bringing in influencers, but what's been the result so far? Like, what have you seen as far as, the reception of having influencers, not the yell and sell, like you said, but taking a strategic approach to it? How's it been received?
Yeah, and let me back up a little bit. And when we say influencers, mm-hmm. right, like we automatically go to like the TikToks and the TikToks and the social media influencers. While they are part of this community, like they are a part of it. They are not the only part of the influencer marketing campaigns. Like influencers can be CPAs, lawyers,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
And so like for us, our working capital campaigns are built around these referral programs that we treat like an influencer marketing campaign. But we're working with CPAs and lawyers who end up referring, it's a win-win situation for their audience, which is essentially their customers, where they're trying to be a value add and where we can add value too. But having that same interaction in terms of producing content, both content that they themselves can use, but also working around, thought leadership and whatnot. And so just to go back a little bit, like with influencer marketing, it is more broad than just TikTok. Mm-hmm. But that being said, we do have, social media and your traditional TikTok influencers. But yeah, it's been like our working capital campaigns, like that was kind of that was our second big campaign. The first campaign that we leveraged was our high yield savings accounts. And so our goal, our high yield savings and high yield checking, and our goal was to generate $60 million over the first 5 years. That was kind of the goal in the first campaign that I was given. But we ended up generating $230 million in the first 6 months.
That's amazing.
And so it was just like, crap, now what do we do with all the money? It's like we had planned for what we were going to do with like $12 million a year. Well, now we have $230 million. And so then it had to kind of shift our internal strategies to the working capital, which we just kind of cut and paste a little bit. And leverage that in the working capital space. And there's a lot of people, even internal to the bank, who said this is not going to work. It's never worked. Marketing's never worked in this space. Like it's worked in other areas, but not this space. And I was like, well, let's try it. Let's see what this looks like.
We'll never know until we test it, right?
Yeah, and and we've had record results. And we were able to grow. 2 years ago, our pipeline was 20 million. Like with our working capital to over 200 million now. And so to be able to 10x something in a span of 2 years has been really rewarding in that sense.
So tell me, as you're going through and explaining how things have gone, clearly there's been growth at TAB Bank since you've been there. Walk me through kind of what the marketing team looks like inside of TAB Bank, and what do you enjoy about working with that team? What are they doing differently that you think is moving the needle to the degree that we've uncovered?
Yeah, so they're all just really good people, right? I always talk to, like in our one-on-ones, I'm always telling them, like, they make my job really easy because we're not just trying to get them to like the bare minimum, just to get them to do their jobs. All of them, go above and beyond. And so then it's like, okay, how do we leverage this and lean into this and leverage their skill sets? So that was the one thing that when I first came on board, I probably, didn't do that great of a job. I had an idea of what a marketing team was going to look like and with who we had, and I just kind of put them where I thought they should be. But over the last 2 years, I've really started to look back and it's like, okay, they might not be a good fit here, or in marketing ops or with our analytics space. But where do they thrive? Like, is it in the event space? Okay, let's just let them run with it and let them use their superpowers and let them do what they want to do. And so, everybody has a title, but in terms of what they actually do, it's like nobody actually does what their title says,
Sure.
right? Like and it really is, matching them to their passions, things that they love to do, but then also what they're really good at doing. And it's not all the same. And then after doing that with the existing team, then we're like, okay, now that we've done that, like, where are our holes? Where are the gaps that we still have? And we've made a couple amazing hires, and who just been able to come in and are rock stars in their own right. And, for me, the biggest thing, technical things we can teach. We can teach a lot of those marketing things. But a lot of the soft skills, learning to be proactive, like being proactive to me is like the number one thing. And like with that new hire, she came in with the playbook. It's like, and she just came ready and like, hey, even though some of these ideas are wrong because she doesn't have context, but the mere fact that she was willing to attempt that during an interview is like, a good indication of what later on, ended up being, a great hire.
And I love that you explained that, because that was, you mentioned these rock star hires, and I was like, ooh, I want to know, from the marketing ops perspective, like, what does John look for a rock star hire? And for me personally, like I've always said all along, it's a can-do attitude. Yep. Somebody who comes in and they can be adaptable. They can understand, okay, well, I don't know how to do this, but I'm going to give it my best shot, like you were talking about. So I think that that's huge for people who are listening in and, wanting to get it into a deeper level of their career within marketing. But, going back to the growth that you've had at TAB, what's the goal over the next 5 years? Like, what does that look like?
Well, I mean, we just surpassed the $1 billion mark.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
And which is funny, we've kind of avoided it for a little bit because it's like it has a whole new set of regulatory issues and rigor and things that you have to do. But now that we've crossed it, the goal is to be a $5 billion bank, right? And really to lean into our strengths. And while traditionally, we've always been a digital online bank, but for a good part of our history, we've probably been run just like a normal community bank, on the back end. But probably over the last 7-10 years, really starting to lean into that technology, right? And it's like we ought to be the thought leaders. We ought to be leading out in this space. We've been in it for 25 years. So, we like to say we were doing digital and mobile banking before it was cool, and to lean into that strength and really be thought leaders in our own right, it is really exciting. Like it's an exciting time to be part of TAB and what we're working on. But yeah, that's kind of what we're working towards.
So basically by Q1 of 2023, we'll be at the 5 billion mark on this pace, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, we have a 5-year plan to get there. We'll just get it at the end of next year. So
I like it.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about that creative, you've got 2 major campaigns under your belt. Both have been very successful. Tell me about, the story of one of them, how it came to be, kind of, who was in charge of running with it? Did it come from in-house? Did you use an agency? Kind of, I'd love to hear how that came to be and how you pushed it out.
Yeah. So, our working capital campaign, actually, for me, it was really rewarding because it was such a big hurdle. And there were so many obstacles that we had to go and to get around it. The rock star hire that we had, she was instrumental in getting this up to pace. And yeah, when we were trying to work through that campaign, it was hard to get any kind of budget. The reason why we talked about like had we raised $230 million. Well, now we needed to know what are we going to do with that $230 million that we hadn't planned for. And so we're like, okay, let's focus on our working capital campaigns. And these working capital campaigns, they're not easy, right? Like they're $1 million plus. They're very in depth. There's a lot that goes into the underwriting process. It's very labor intensive, and the sales cycles are long, right? You're looking at, on average, 9 months, 9 months plus in terms of the sales cycle. And so, when internally you already have a little bit of hesitation of, I don't think marketing can do this. And then you combine it with, hey, we need a year to be able to prove this out. Because, even right out of the gate, if it starts working, we're not going to be able to see that until 9 months down the road. One of the key things that we had to do is mark, and be very thoughtful of, what does success look like along the way? Because we had to report back into it, so that we can continue to have that investment into this, into those marketing campaigns. But leaning in heavily into data and really understanding the analytics and the insights around that was a big deal. One of our insights, like I said, was leaning in and leveraging, when we were talking to a lot of the owners or the product owners within the bank, the number one thing that everybody said is the key decision maker is the owner of the company. Across the board, that's what everybody said. But then when we looked at the data, and we created we borrowed this from Clayton Christensen. Mm-hmm. It says an assumption checklist. And so we created this assumption checklist and, created, we have a bazillion experiments that we need to run. Which ones do we run first? And so you compare it based on business impact and knowledge, an amount of uncertainty. And so both in terms of impact as well as uncertainty was actually who is the decision maker. And the assumption was it was a business owner. But then when we're looking at the data, there wasn't actually any data that kind of showed that this was the case. And so we kind of leaned into this and we're like, okay, who's the actual influencer when it comes to this? And this is kind of going back to a little bit B2B, B2B sales and things that a lot of people in that space understand. But at least institutionally, we didn't understand that. And then we realized it wasn't that. It was a CFO, right? Like it was the uncle that shouldn't be CFO, that is a CFO, like, or whoever. And then the other key insight was learning about the lawyers and CPAs. And when we looked at them, we're like, I mean, they work just as well as some of our brokers. I mean, even more so, like the customers that they end up referring to us stay longer. And they're just doing it because it's a value add. Like they don't get anything from it. It just helps their own customers. So it really became a win-win. And so when we started to lean into that and kind of use some account-based marketing techniques and strategies, in addition to the digital strategies that we were already implementing, all of a sudden we started to kind of see the slow trickle to the point now, it's just, it's kind of a solid process now, and that was the other thing that I had to do at the bank that we did as a team is, everybody gets their one-off wins.
Sure.
And so how do we codify that, right? Like how do we replicate the wins and successes that we created? And so creating systems and processes that are built around that was a big deal. So
it's funny you say that because my biggest marketing mentor taught me create, validate, and replicate. And that's exactly what you're talking about right now. And so, I think that's a immutable law of marketing, if you will. But tell me about a mentor that maybe you've had along the way within the marketing realm. I mean, to me, it seems like the people who I talk to who are engaged in marketing, always one or two people will come to mind as like, oh, I learned this from this person or I learned that from that person. What has John learned along the way and who did you learn it from?
Yeah, like the OG in terms of my mentorship, like the people that I kind of learned a lot from was, it was with my paid social when I was really starting to learn and understand that. Dennis Yu was just awesome in terms of helping me.
Great.
Yeah, like, and I actually just ran into him yesterday and kind of chatted with him and we were reminiscing about all of the things that I kind of learned from him. Another person was Susan Winograd, and so Susan was like amazing. Like her, she was the first time that I would go to like a conference or read her stuff that it wasn't just like, hey, focus on the customer or really like listen to the customers, but like really granular, in-depth, tactical things that helped you understand. It's like, okay, listen to the customer, but like this is how you actually do this, right? And like when you're deep diving into your Google search, with your search ads, like, learning how to create that structure and learning what to look at, how to pull those insights, really helped, those two individuals in the early days of my digital marketing career as I was growing into it, definitely were the ones that I kind of looked up to, kind of followed their stuff on Facebook, LinkedIn, and they're published everywhere and just following and just being a sponge.
Yeah.
And then, typically with most mentor models, like when you're first learning it, you copy it almost exactly, right? Like, cause I don't have any other models. And this is something that I'm going into new. So I'm just going to take their model and replicate it. But then what happens is then over time, then it's like, okay, I've done that. Now, how do I add my own flavor?
Yes.
How do I add my own expertise to this? And then you start to build out, and then you start to, in my mind, that's how you find your voice, right? Like that's where you find your own voice and your own perspective on how to run these marketing campaigns. But the start was definitely Dennis and Susan. They were awesome mentors and people that I still stay connected with because of that.
And on the flip side of it, now understanding that you're in a leadership capacity and you've made a mark on, marketing within our realm. You're a well-known established name, but at the end of the day, like what's the most important to you? Like what do you hope that people learn from John Huntinghouse?
Very high level, really to treat people like people because, I've, like I said, I've just been in so many, jobs myself. And we had crazy talented people who could do amazing things, but because they were treated poorly or weren't allowed to lean into their superpowers, like that superpower was never able to come out. And, you know, learning to allow to trust your team, right? Like, and you have to validate that trust, you know, but like, you know, there's this old saying, right? Like, trust but verify.
Sure.
And I hate that. I hate that saying so much because it's so micromanaging, right? It's just like, I trust you, but I'm going to keep one eye on you the whole time to verify that this is true. It's like, it's fine to validate beforehand. It's like, okay, let's walk through, like, what are some of the things that are going to build that trust? But once that trust is built, like, just let them do their thing, you know? And oftentimes, more often than not, like when I interject myself, like constantly all the time, I usually screw it up, right? But when I allow the team to do what they do best, great things happen. And so from a high level, that's, you know, that's kind of my big champion thing. But then also when it comes to marketing, like learning to be just different, right? And not to add to the noise. Like there's so much marketing, you know, whether it's from company blog posts or white papers or ads or whatever, like learning to not just add, you know, create content for the sake of content or create ads for the sake of creating ads, but finding a way to like, how do we break through this noise, right? How do we add value to it? And then how do we differentiate ourselves? You know, it's not, you know, that different. And then probably the third thing that I would say is learning to have a little bit more rigor when it comes to the marketing processes and systems. So like for me, like our basis, right, is kind of following kind of the scientific method. And this is kind of, you know, pulled back from my background of, you know, doing so much cardiovascular research back in the day. But what happens is I see so many marketers, right? Like we constantly talk about experimentation and running experiments, but then like when I look at their experiments they're running, they're all wrong. Like they don't run actual experiments. And what they're doing is they're like, all right, let's come up with a question. Let's test something out. And then when they're creating their hypothesis, they don't create a hypothesis. Normally their hypothesis is, let's just see what happens. The problem with that hypothesis is like, you always see what happens, like, but you don't actually learn from it, right? It's just like, okay, this worked. Well, I don't know why it worked because I didn't create something specific to learn from. And then when it comes on to your next experiments, right? Like when you're following the scientific method, the last part is you analyze and you draw conclusions, but like those questions that come out from that analysis, those are the questions that lead to your next experiments, right? Like they build upon each other. But so many marketers, like they run something and it works or it doesn't work and they're like, great. And then they run another experiment completely irrelevant to the first one that they just ran. And so oftentimes what you'll see is 6 months down the line, they're still trying to figure out how to run the campaign. Like it's fine initially, like it's going to be a mess. It's going to be awful because there's so many unknowns, so much uncertainty. But a year into it, a year and a half into it, like you should know a lot more definitively because you've run these tests in a systematic way to learn from it. And so you should, you know, oftentimes I think marketers, we just throw stuff on the wall. And again, when you're first starting out, it's fine. But then when you're actually going into these campaigns, like 6 months, a year into it, like you shouldn't be just throwing stuff at the wall. You should know, have at least a general idea in terms of understanding the channels, what messaging is working, what's resonating, where you should lean into, where you should be avoiding. So,
and I love that because the evolution optimization component of it is, you know, it proves that you're going to be, you know, rapid fire where it's like one after another and the consistency element is there, but there has to be that evolution or else it's going to fall on deaf ears.
Can I ask a question? And we may even cut this out of the podcast.
No, you're good.
Give me an example of that hypothesis idea that people are not doing right. So you said, you know, is it like this? A 15-second video works better than a 20-second video? Is that essentially what you're saying? Like testing that specific thing?
Yeah. So let's just say a 15-second video is going to work better than a 30-second video. But then the hypothesis around it, right, is based on attention span, maybe, right? And so the hypothesis is that the 15-second video is going to work better than the 30-second video because people's attention spans are lower, and therefore we need to grab the attention sooner, quicker, and faster, and so that will work. And so then what happens is then you see what happens, right? Like, you know, so let's just say the 30-second video worked. Well, clearly that that invalidated, your original hypothesis. So there's something that's going on that you're not seeing. And so as you're doing that analysis, it's like, okay, well, maybe this is why. And it may be that the creative wasn't strong enough or the messaging wasn't soon enough. Okay, well, then that becomes our new test. So we're going to now make the creative, like the messaging sooner, or whatever we come out from that analysis now becomes our next experiment, right?
So it's an intentionality behind the experiment,
Yes.
rather than just testing creative or just testing audience per se, but a reason why I'm testing that creative or that audience.
Right. And when you look at all of these, like you go to like the U of U or or these or BYU or any of these research institutions, like you'll notice, like one of the things that a lot of these doctors and PhDs they tend to go more granular over time, and the reason that happens is because they become like they're following that same path, right? They start these experiments and they start to like become really like subject matter experts around this one particular thing, but they connect them, right? And there's a whole nother thing that we can talk about in terms of documentation. And because you go to any of these PhDs, it's like, hey, you wrote a paper, you ran an experiment 2 years ago. Could you tell me more about that? They can provide you with all of the documentation. It's like, hey, this is what we did. These were the experiments we ran. This is what we learned. And they pull back from that. Whereas marketers, you go, hey, you ran this campaign, 18 months ago. Can you walk me through the results and what you learned and lessons? It's like nobody documents it. Like they just run with it. Like, oh, it was good. And then they go on to the next one. And so documentation is actually part of that process of that scientific method, is documenting your learnings along the way so that you can reference back as you're running into new things.
And are you doing this at TAB Bank? Are you documenting this?
Yeah.
I'll be there tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'd like to see this.
No, you could totally come. And not only do we document it like internally, we do it externally.
Cool.
And it's actually, and this is what I don't understand why more marketers don't lean into this, right? Like you can absolutely document your learnings externally, and then it becomes content, right? Like, and so like for us, like Marketing Sherpa doing like an in-depth case study on our working capital campaign, for example. And it just breaks it down very granularly, like what were the steps, what were the lessons learned, what was our hypothesis when we were creating that. And then you can leverage that and, continue to get, more publications or more, thought leadership around the things that you're working on.
I love that. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Because, I think that so many times people will say, well, can you provide me some case studies? And it's like, I've done this for this person or this client. And it's like, I have all these ideas that are floating around in my head, but I haven't taken the time to chart the progress and to show what I've done. And that's frustrating, where if that can be a part of the system, I think it can be, like you're saying right now, it's beneficial on multiple levels.
Yeah. I mean, we did that at the agency, right? And with the agency, it was wildly helpful, right? Like as we're doing these case studies, like taking our internal information and knowledge and sharing it with Google and Facebook.
Sure.
And they're like, oh, hey, this is really well done.
This is good stuff.
Yeah. And so what do? They share it on their stuff and on their pages, right? And then in turn, it's like all of a sudden it becomes, the social proofing. So from the agency standpoint, we're like, hey, look, Facebook posted, even though it was our internal case study, it's like, Facebook posted this. Like, don't take our word for it, take their word for it. And then all of a sudden it becomes self-validating on the work that you're doing. And it's not just TAB Bank saying that we're doing good stuff. Like other parties are, validating the work that's being done.
Proof in the pudding that is now working for you as your own marketing lead magnet.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Good stuff.
And you mentioned you're a professor, or you're doing some work teaching the youth of America. So tell me where you're working and who and what sort of classes you're teaching.
Yeah, right now I teach marketing strategy at Weber State. I taught forever, about 7 years over at Ensign College, but living up in South Weber, it's a little bit of a drive, and so Weber is a lot closer. So yeah, I teach marketing strategy at Weber State University.
How is the marketing program up there at Weber State? We hear a lot about what's going on at the U and BYU just because of their sizes, but tell us a little bit about the program up there.
Yeah, no, it's really, really good. And it was one of the things when I first came there. Like I didn't know much about the program because I wasn't heavily involved in it, but now being more into it, the faculty, like they're amazing, and it's crazy. Like when you start to look in their background, and and the work that they're doing and the research that they're putting out there is like, how, anecdotally, you're kind of like, how are you still at Weber? Like, why are you like not like at like a larger university? Because some of the work that they're doing is pretty amazing. But in addition to the faculty, like the students are just awesome. Like, they're so engaged, and it makes, again, just like as a manager, like when you have proactive, engaged team members, it makes it a lot easier. Same thing with the students. Like when the students are like fully engaged and they're just sponges and they just want to learn, it's been really, really helpful.
Awesome. Well, we always end with a couple of questions. So first one is, give us some bars, restaurants, coffee shops, places we should go visit that have good food or drink. Yeah,
that's a good question. So for me, I'm always going to represent, even though that everyone probably already knows it, like I love Cup Bop. Cup Bop is like my go-to.
Okay. All right.
And so
I've seen you with some Cup Bop before, like at the Silicon Slopes event. I remember seeing you with a Cup Bop.
Yeah, like so, like I just I guess there's a personal connection there, but like I love eating there. And the
will you go into their storefront, or do you just have to get the truck?
Both. I'll do both. Right. And so, yeah, forever, like when they were only food trucks, we would we lived in North Salt Lake. We would drive to Utah County, right, just for Cup Bop, just because I loved eating there, and it was so much fun. I always love Moochie's. Moochie's is like one of my kind of favorite go-to.
What do you order at Moochie's?
It's always a Philly steak. It's always the same.
I've been going with the meatball sub lately.
Yeah,
I love it there.
So one of these days I'll actually do something different. But
I'm telling you, it's worth making that jump to that other side of the meatball sub there.
All right,
it's pretty good.
I'll have to try that.
Okay.
And then I would say the last one, Red Fort. I love Red Fort.
Where's Red Fort?
Yeah, tell me about this.
So it's down in. So it's started in St. George.
Okay.
And so they have one location there, but like they just opened one up north, up in Layton, and it's just this Indian. It's just the Indian food there is like amazing. So to show how good of how amazing it was. So my wife, like literally our entire marriage, and we've been married for 16 years. She not only does she not like Indian food, she can't stand the smell of it.
Okay.
And so like when I would go on business trips, I would always get Indian food because it's the only time that I would be able to eat Indian food. But finally we just like basically me and my friends and we just peer pressured her in. She's like, hey, listen, you're coming with us. Like, we're all going to come. Like, you have to at least come. You don't have to eat anything. Just come. Yeah. And, while she was there, she kind of took a couple bites of my meal, right? Yeah. And now she loves it. Now, so she hated her entire life. She hated Indian food. But because of Red Fort, like, it was so good. She's now a fan.
What's the go-to dish at Red Fort?
Honestly, any of their, yellow, red curries. I like their coconut. Kind of their chicken coconut curries.
Okay.
That's always solid.
All right, I'm going to add that to my list.
Yeah, it's good.
Thanks for the recommendations.
You're welcome.
So tell us how people can find you. Where are you at on social media? What's your TikTok handle so they can come follow you there? How do people get in touch with you if they want to come to school up at Weber State or find you on the interwebs?
Yeah, the easiest way is just to find me on LinkedIn. Okay. So it's just John Huntinghouse, and I'm the only Huntinghouse you're going to find on LinkedIn. I'm on the other channels, but it's primarily LinkedIn.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
By Subjects is a production of Modern 8 Agency in Silicon Slopes. Executive producers are Alicia Smith and Peter Stevenson. Editor and producer is Dave Meekum. Video production by Connor Mitchell. Development production by Eric Dahl. Production management by Shelby Sandlin. Original music composed by Josh Johnson. Website designed by Modern 8. Please make sure to follow and share the show with your friends and your enemies. Thanks for joining us.